Please have a seat. I know there's still a couple of people coming in, but we should get started. I'm Jonathan Brent. I'm Executive Director of the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. Those of you who don't know what YIVO means, or even know how to pronounce it, it's from Yiddischer Wissenschaftlicher Institut, a Yiddish organization, therefore deeply and intimately connected to Yiddish jokes of all sorts and comedy, but also the most serious and profound history of the Jewish people of Eastern Europe and Russia over 1,000 years. Our archive and our library are the repositories of extraordinary materials. I can't even begin to explain all that is in our archive, but suffice it to say that it runs all the way from rare rabbinical and Hasidic works of the 18th century to the organizational records of Grossinger's Resort. It has, on the one hand, the most devastating materials you could possibly find, original materials pertaining to the Holocaust. We were the first organization in the world to begin documenting the Holocaust in Poland in 1941. We have the records of the Warsaw Ghetto that were put in milk cans. Some of you perhaps know that story and were dug up after the war. On the other hand, we have, to my knowledge, the only archive of Yiddish pornography in the world. So this is a vastness. This is an ocean that you have found yourself in. This is a great gift, the YIVO Institute. It was a gift to the Jewish people and to America that was brought about by the devastation of World War II, the heroism of many people who hid our archives, who fought for our materials. The Nazis stole them. The American Army in 1946 found a great deal of it in Frankfurt, Germany. Much remains still in Vilnius, Lithuania, which was the home where we were born in 1925. And we are now in the midst of the biggest project in YIVO's history, to digitize, to preserve, to conserve, to repair all of our pre-war documents that the Nazis stole. And many of these documents, when I saw them in Vilnius for the first time, are rolled up in balls. And when you unopen them, dust falls out of these balls. And we now have teams of people here in the US and in Lithuania working to smooth these out, repair these documents, digitize them, put them in order so that for the first time in 75 years, we will have again a coherent and complete set of materials. We will never be able to replace that which was lost and stolen by the Nazis and through the chaos of war, but we are doing our best for the first time to be able to present to the Jewish people worldwide a true documentary history of 1,000 years of Jewish life in Eastern Europe, and most of us in this room are the product of that history. I invite you all, if you are interested, to find out more about this extraordinary project. It is called the Vilna Collections Project, and there are materials on our table outside. Now, we get to what you're all here for, which is our program this evening. And to introduce the program is our senior academic advisor and exhibitions director, Eddie Portnoy. Eddie was a professor at Rutgers. He's published numerous works on Jewish popular culture. He's an inspiration to this institution and to many people outside of this institution. So, Eddie.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you all for coming. I just briefly like to thank the volunteers and Leah Falk, everyone at EVO. They've done a fantastic job preparing this. What I'm about to do is just give you sort of a prehistory of Jews and comedy in America. Now, I'd actually like to begin with the premise that Jews are not funny. If you consider the textual history of this people, from the Bible to the Mishnah to the Talmud and on to rabbinic responsa, there really aren't a lot of laughs. There are a few jokes and some clever wordplay here and there, but for the most part, traditional Jewish texts tend to be a little dry. And this appears to be one of the reasons why 19th century social scholarship conceived of Jews as having no sense of humor. The French historian Ernest Renan, for example, argued that Jews were not funny at all. He went as far as to say that, quote, Semitic people lack the faculty to laugh, end quote. According to Renan, not only were Jews incapable of making jokes, but they did not even have the capacity to laugh at them. Additionally, the Scottish philosopher Thomas Carlyle, in discussing... If you're a serious scholar, you have to look serious. In discussing their Jews and their relationship to comedy, asserted that Jews did not show the slightest trace of humor at any period in their history. Such statements on the part of European intellectuals are telling, mostly because it's likely that they did rely on traditional Jewish texts to make the assertion that Jews aren't funny. The reality appears to have been that neither of these scholars had much contact at all with actual Jews. It's my stock actual Jew photo. If they had, they might have known that the second half of the 19th century, the exact time they were making these claims, was a heyday of a Jewish enlightenment in Eastern Europe, which produced huge amounts of parody and satire on the surface of social progress. This literary movement drew on the rich humor of Jewish folklore and boasted writers like Sholem Aleichem, who wrote the stories on which Fiddler on the Roof was based. One of the reasons scholars like Carlyle and Renan lacked familiarity with Jewish satire was that much of it was written in Yiddish, the language of most of the world's Jews at the time. Not only was Yiddish the vessel for the modern satire of the late 19th century, but it was the vehicle for thousands of jokes, witticisms, and folk tales, including the stories of the wise men of Chelm, the legendary town of Jewish idiots. For their part, Yiddish-speaking Jews knew they were funny, much more so than their neighbors in Eastern Europe. This is revealed in the following Yiddish anecdote. When you tell a peasant a joke, he laughs 3 times. Once when you tell it, once when you explain it, and once when he understands it. When you tell a Polish nobleman a joke, he laughs twice. Once when you tell it, and once when you explain it. But he never actually understands it. When you tell a Russian officer a joke, he only laughs once when you tell it. He'll never understand it, and he'll put you in jail if you explain it. But when you tell a Jew a joke, he interrupts you to say that he's already heard it, and that, by the way, you're telling it wrong. Yiddish-speaking Jews knew they were funny, and more importantly, they knew that one of the keys to unlocking humor could be found in manipulating language. In 1889, around the same time that scholars like Renan and Carlyle were claiming that Jews weren't funny, a Yiddish newspaper in New York organized a joke contest for its readers. The introduction to it reads as follows. Yiddish is known everywhere as a language in which one can express the best jokes, the most hilarious expressions, the funniest anecdotes, and the wisest aphorisms. In reality, the Jewish language is very flexible and contains many words from a variety of languages and can be bent and twisted on all sides. Yiddish-speaking Jews had no idea that European scholars considered them humorless. It was quite the opposite. They thought that they were funnier than everyone else, and that not only was Yiddish well suited for humor, but that one of the keys to comedy was its linguistic flexibility. There was also a sense that, more so than other languages, things were simply funnier in Yiddish. These linguistic matters, combined with an outsider's perspective and the sense that humor could serve a necessary social function as both a weapon and a shield, helped create a very serious Jewish sense of humor. Now, for Americans who were encountering Jewish immigrants for the first time during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, there appeared to be something humorous about these Jews, with their beards and hats and wigs, their wild gesticulations, and their funny accents. A significant portion of the American humor industry, which was ethnically based, made good use of these features. And because American humor was already making fun of every other ethnic group, often in very ugly ways, the Jews fit right in. Exploiting cultural and physical stereotypes, Jews were portrayed as dark-haired, hook-nosed, greedy cheats doing anything to make a buck. While today such portrayals would be considered completely unacceptable, a century ago, they were completely normal and appeared in magazines, in books, and on postcards on a regular basis. I just have a few examples here. And there are dozens and dozens of publications like these. Similar to blackface performance, there was also a type of Jewface performance common in vaudeville, in which actors put on putty noses and beards and acted as the stage Jew. This is one example. Here's a video of this from 1903, of a stage Jew performance. It's silent, so sorry. Within the sphere of ethnic humor, where crude portrayals of Irish, Italian, Chinese, and black stage characters existed, the stage Jew was an integral part of American humor. But unlike most other ethnic groups, which chafed at the abuse hurled at them, many Jews came to the conclusion that they could do a better job making fun of themselves than the Gentiles did. As more and more Jews began to join the entertainment industry during the early 20th century, they began to play stage Jews as well. Actors like Joe Hayman and Fanny Brice put on Yiddish accents in order to take advantage of the popularity of the stage Jew. Songwriters did the same. Composers like Irving Berlin wrote Jewish novelty songs which were recorded by popular performers and sold as sheet music so people could play them at home. This so-called Hebrew comedy was one of the most popular forms of early 20th century American humor. And here are some examples. Now, we also have more examples on view just around the corner from the auditorium in our Jewface exhibit, which is based on this sheet music. These two, incidentally, were written by Irving Berlin. Now, there were some Jews who protested this form of entertainment, but self-mockery was already an integral part of Jewish humor. As author Somerset Maugham remarked on Jews and their comedy, he said, quote, "I was not quite sure of a sense of humor that made such cruel fun of his own race," unquote. Essentially, Jewish humorists reappropriated the anti-Semitism directed at them, internalized it, and spit it back out as comedy. Now, the Jewish immigrant neighborhoods of New York City, Brooklyn, the Bronx, and the Lower East Side were meccas for popular entertainment. Not only were there more Nickelodeons and vaudeville theaters per capita on the Lower East Side than any other place in the city, but the streets themselves were full of free entertainment, ranging from amateur performers to fights to drunks, bums, and hookers. Perhaps because of the intensity of city life, Jews living in the stifling tenements of these neighborhoods had a strong desire to get out of the city during the sweltering summers. Beginning around the end of the 19th century, Jewish farmers in the Catskill Mountains looking to make a few extra bucks began hosting boarders during their summer months. This was the genesis of the Borscht Belt, and as it became a more popular destination, Jewish farmers gave up farming and opened hotels instead. This is Kutcher's, what Kutcher's looked like in 1908. Now, in the beginning, entertainment was non-existent and only began when bored guests began to stage a mock wedding with a fake rabbi and bride and groom in drag. These weddings became an annual affair, and as their popularity grew, it became professionalized, with Yiddish theater actors playing the roles and klezmer bands supplying the music, and run by what the Yiddish press called a professioneller Cheinekacker, or a noisemaker, or literally it's a professional tea kettle banger. As the Catskills began to fill up with Jews from the city every summer, entertainment became an integral component of resort life there. By the 1920s, the occupation of the tumler was developed. Typically a comedian, the tumler or social director entertained the guests when they weren't being professionally entertained by musical acts, dance instructors, plays, lectures, comedy acts, and mountains of food. Stages were built and elaborate plays and musicals were produced. A huge variety of performances were provided for Catskills visitors. Now here one has to ask, what kind of guest needs to be entertained all the time? Prior to the Jewish invasion, the Catskills did have a resort industry, but not one that provided entertainment at all. Why did Jews require entertainment more than other people? Good food and fresh mountain air wasn't enough? As the hotel industry in the Catskills expanded during the 1940s and 50s, the hotel keepers understood that their guests had a need for constant entertainment and built their hotels with this in mind. So look at this picture here of Kutsher's in 1908. Here it is in the 1960s. The major hotels, Kutsher's, Grossinger's, the Concord, and others, attracted major talent. Although all kinds of performances took place in the Catskills, a central component was comedy. This is the theater in the Concord. And these last pictures I'll show you are all from Grossinger's and part of the YIVO archive. The predominance of Jewish guests created a unique performer-audience dynamic. At once voracious and demanding, Jewish audiences already had a familiarity with professionally staged productions in New York City, an aspect that gave them a discerning and perhaps jaundiced eye. Another fact that required the Catskill productions to step up their game. The nearly all-Jewish in-group environment gave audiences the perceived right to public criticism. In other words, there was a lot of heckling. For comedians, this was an opportunity to sharpen their comic knives and aim them at the hecklers. But for other performers, it was a potential nightmare. As Mel Brooks said, "The Catskills shaped my life. I will forever be grateful to those tough Jewish audiences. If you could make them laugh, you could conquer the world." This dynamic was more important to comedians than any other group of performers. Comedians, in fact, became the #1 export of the Catskill Mountains. Dozens of them honed their skills in the raucous casinos of the Borscht Belt, many going on to great fame in New York, Miami, Las Vegas, and beyond. A sort of college for comedians, the Catskills was one of the places that was integral to the development of American comedy and where the careers of some of America's best-known comedians were made. This isn't comedians, but it's good gossip. The exhibit you'll see tonight contains materials on Jewish comedy and humor that ranges from the 1860s through the 1960s and is a combination of YIVO's materials together with those of Drew Friedman. They will be on view on the 3rd floor following the discussion. We're indebted to Drew Friedman for loaning portions of his incredible collection for the exhibition. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator. Our esteemed moderator tonight has written comedy material for everyone from Howard Stern to Bill Murray to Meryl Streep. He's currently a writer at ABC's The View and the co-producer and co-host of Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast, named the best podcast of 2015 by The Village Voice. Please welcome Frank Santopadre.
Oh, thank you guys. Thank you very much. We're laughing backstage. Oh, you can hear us? Cliff's wonderful book, which we'll talk about. First thing I want to say, thank you for having me, Eddie. And I want to say that Judy Gold sadly could not be with us because she's working. Judy, so mazel tov. Judy, how am I doing? Let's get started, because time is of the essence. Drew Friedman. They're waiting back there. Drew Friedman is an award-winning illustrator and satirist whose work regularly appears in dozens of major publications and whose painstaking attention to detail and parodies of Hollywood icons is widely admired. Drew's work has appeared in Entertainment Weekly, Newsweek, Time, The Wall Street Journal, Esquire, Rolling Stone, and Mad Magazine, as well as many other places. His wonderful must-have books include the collections Any Similarity to Persons Living or Dead is Purely Coincidental. He did with his brother Josh, who is here. Wonderful book. Josh, where are you? Not here, wait. Warts and All, and old Jewish comedians and more old Jewish comedians, which no less than the New York Times Book Review said of these books. A festival of drawing virtuosity and fabulous craggy faces, Friedman might very well be the Vermeer of the Borscht Belt. I know that line. Drew Friedman. Up next, Cliff Nesterhoff is a best-selling author and comedy historian acclaimed for his vast, and I mean vast, knowledge of show business. In fact, Vice magazine called him the human encyclopedia of comedy and Los Angeles Magazine called him the king of comedy lore. Cliff's work has been praised by the Atlantic Monthly, the Chicago Tribune, Comedy Central, and Vanity Fair, among other places. For several years, he moderated Classic Television Showbiz, which is a blog you guys should check out. It's wonderful. And his new book from Grove Press, which I have right here, his book is called The Comedians, Drunk Thieves, Scoundrels, and the History of American Comedy. It's fascinating. Cliff Nesteroff.
Wait, I just want to say that Cliff and Drew's books are available for sale outside.
Fantastic. Our next guest is a very funny and very prolific comedy writer and multiple Emmy winner. He's written classic television shows like Curb Your Enthusiasm and It's Gary Shandling Show, which he also co-created, by the way. He's written and co-written Broadway plays, including Billy Crystal's 700 Sundays. He's written novels, including the Thurber Award-winning The Other Schulman. And for several years, he was an eyewitness to comedy history as a staff writer. I believe the first writer hired on the original Saturday Night Live, Alan Zweibel. Our next guest is nothing short of a show business legend, and a multi-talented one at that. He has appeared in popular films such as The Owl and the Pussycat, Hooper, and 2 Weeks' Notice, among other things. He's recorded several classic comedy albums, including Child of the 50s and Mind Over Matter, which I played till they warped as a kid. He starred in immensely popular HBO specials. He was nominated for a Tony for his work in the musical They're Playing Our Song, and he's one of the most respected and admired and enduring stand-up comedians of the last 50 years, Robert Klein. And our surprise guest tonight, playing the role of Judy Gold, is one of the most original comedy talents of the past 4 decades, known as much for his distinctive voice and voiceover work as his audacity and fearlessness as a stand-up comedian. He starred in hit films like Aladdin and Beverly Hills Cop 2, and at least 42 versions of the movie Problem Child, as well as dozens of TV shows. His unique brand of comedy led many to refer to him as the comedian's comedian, and his offbeat brand of comedy has influenced everyone from Andy Samberg to Jimmy Fallon. Welcome, my friend and podcast partner, Gilbert Gottfried.
Right. I've been watching these debates, so I'm going to, have to do my... Thank you for your service. I had to get that up.
I appreciate that. Why don't we talk about the old Jewish comedians books, since they're here on display, and people, as Eddie pointed out, they can be purchased. How did the old Jewish comedians books come about?
Well, that's a good question. When I was a little kid, I was a strange little kid. All I wanted to do was watch TV with my guinea pig in my bedroom with my Mad magazines and my comic books and my Monster magazines. And I just loved old comedy movies, especially, and comedy TV shows. And it just started to dawn on me early on that most of the comedians that I loved were Jewish. It's just like the Three Stooges and Jerry Lewis and Sid Caesar and Jack Benny and Phil Silvers. Just overwhelmingly Jewish. Not every one of them. I loved Jackie Gleason, Art Carney, Buster Keaton, Don Knotts, Richard Pryor, but so many were Jewish. So as I became an artist, I realized I like drawing old Jews the most, and I like drawing comedians, so I put that together, and I had old Jewish comedians, and that became, my business, basically. And that's what led to it,
And were there some negative reactions? I know Jerry Lewis had a very positive reaction.
Well, the books were sent out to some of the still living comedians. The publisher sent them out to a few of them.
And a lawyer has been contacted. I don't look like that.
And some of the younger, older Jewish comedians like Robert. Robert was actually in the third volume, because I was running out of the really old ones. Yeah, but he finally crossed over But I got phone calls from I got phone messages from Mickey Freeman from the old Bilko show, who loved it. Freddie Roman, who adored it, who was thrilled to be in there. And then the third message came in, and it was it was on the answering machine. Hello, Drew. This is Jerry Lewis. Please call me back. And he left his phone number twice. Some people might have heard this story, but I'll repeat it anyway. So I got real nervous, and I said to Kathy, my wife, I said, "Oh shit, Jerry is mad at me. What did I do?" I said, "I didn't put him on the cover. I gave him that stupid expression in the illustration." So I got my nerve up and called him back. I said, "Hey, Jerry, you got the book?" "Yes, Drew, I got the book." He said, So did you like it?" "Did I like it? Jesus Christ, I loved it. Holy moly, what a book." And so I felt good about that.
Share with us at least one less than enthusiastic reaction.
Oh, well, the Los Angeles Times did a profile of the book, and they sent a reporter over to Jack Carter, or they had a guy called Jack Carter, the comedian, from, the legendary Jewish comedian Jack Carter, who Cliff writes about at length in his book. But so the reporter said, how do you feel about being in a book called Old Jewish Comedians? And Jack Carter said, "Old?" And he was about 94 at the time. And then he goes, "Jewish?" He goes, "I don't work Jewish." So he was pissed about, being in a book called Old Jewish. And then he finally saw the book. He hadn't seen it yet, and he was especially angry. He said, he drew me with those liver spots and my hair combed over like that. I don't look like that. Tell him to draw me again. I said, "No, that's it. That's the only, that's what he gets." So,
Remember Jack Carter? He passed away. Very happy guy.
Jack is prominent again in Cliff's book, and he can
he's all
talk
over
about
it.
Jack.
We just wrapped, so I was just going to get to that. So you interviewed, you probably did the last interview.
Yeah, well, I spoke with Jack at length. I had a morbid fascination with him because I would see him on every TV show ever from, he had his own network show, Saturday nights, leading into Sid Caesar in 1950, called The Jack Carter Show. And he was very bitter that people lionized Sid Caesar and loved him, but didn't remember The Jack Carter Show. So I remember asking him for the first time about Sid Caesar and your show of shows. And Jack said, "It was always Sid Caesar, Sid Caesar, Sid Caesar. And I was treated like crap." And he always screamed, he always yelled, but he had this incredible memory going back to when he started stand-up in 1943, and I interviewed him right through 2015, so it was kind of fascinating to me that this guy could tell me firsthand stories about Al Jolson, and he's sitting across from me. Of course, he had nothing good to say about anybody, but I found that absolutely amazing, and the last thing he said to me before he passed away, this is in the introduction to my book, and I had collected all these great stories from him, and he wanted to write his own book, and he was ranting one day. He goes, "Everybody's got a book now. Betty White's got 2 books. Dick Van Dyke's got 2 books. This nickel and dime comic Jeff Ross is calling himself the king of roasts. King of roast, I'm the king of roasts. Chelsea Handler's writing shit books about vodka. Bestseller, what the hell?" Ranting and raving. And I had recently gotten my book deal, and I told him that, and as I was leaving his house, he said, "How does a total fucking nobody like you get a book deal?" But Jack was so entertaining for that reason, And I really loved him, even though his act, if you see it on the Ed Sullivan Show, it's very maudlin, and he'd finish with a song about how much he loved to entertain, and then he would get off the stage and go, "Those fucking cocksuckers didn't give me anything." So I loved him. He was great.
I want to plug too. Google "shit Jack Carter says," which is something that Cliff put together. It's wonderful. It delivers.
Yeah, it's a hashtag I put together for some of the more salacious things Jack Carter said to me. Yeah, there's a story in there about, I won't go into it. It's maybe a little bit too salacious for this crowd, but you can Google it if you want. I could tell you. Really?
What do you think?
Yeah,
Jack, you were on the Carol Burnett show once. Vicki Lawrence was a Nazi cunt! Jack, you worked with Alan and Rossi. Oh, yeah, we were down in Bermuda with Steve Rossi. He went to pick up a hooker. He felt under the skirt. He felt balls. He said, "What the fuck?" He got beat up by a transvestite. I don't know how Steve Rossi stayed out of jail. You were on the game show Password, Jack. Alan Ludden was just Bill Cullen without the limp. I don't know. There's more and more. You can look it up. Shit Jack Carter says.
Mr. Swibel.
Yes.
No Jack Carter stories, I would imagine.
No, and I'm the only one on the panel that's not Jewish, too, by the way. Yeah. This is Nordic, yeah. Yeah.
You started out, we were talking backstage about the Catskills. You started out, you were
I was-
writing for Catskills.
Well, you mentioned Freddie Roman. I wrote for this was the early 70s. The heyday of the Catskills was already in the past. Whoever was going to be a star was already a star. So I wrote for the guys who were left. Every Morty, Dickie, Freddie, Mickey, and Lee that ever lived, I wrote $7 a joke. That's how much the going rate was in 1973, 74. The first joke I ever wrote for Freddie Roman was about a Hasidic orgy where the men were on one side of the room and the women were on the other. Okay. $7, yeah. And then my price went to 10 and then 12. And these were all very nondescript comedians who wore tuxedos and had, false teeth and everything.
Some of the names out at us, I mean, Cliff will recognize him through.
Morty Gunty.
Yeah, Morty Gunty.
Dick Capri.
He's still working.
Not only is he still working, Robin, my wife and I went a few years ago to see Catskills on Broadway. Okay, on the bill were Freddie Roman, Dick Capri, Malzy Lawrence, and a woman, Louise DeWatt, or Marilyn Michaels. So Robin and I are sitting in the audience, and Dick Capri is telling jokes, and I'm whispering the punchlines to Robin. And she says, "How do you know that?" I said, "It's the 35th anniversary of the jokes that I wrote for the guy." Afterwards, we go backstage just to see the guys, right? And Capri comes up to me and he says, "Hey, the jokes still work." And then I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Any notes for me?" I said, "Well, now that you bring it up, you might want to consider, the joke that I wrote for you in 1973 about the Secretary of State." He goes, "Yeah." I said, "You may want to consider changing Kissinger's name to Madeleine Albright." And he looks at me like I'm talking a foreign language. And he goes, "Huh?" And I go, "Well, because unless you do that joke in the past tense, it really would be a little more current if you did Madeleine Albright." So he said, "Let me give it some thought." About 6 months later, I walk into the Friars Club, and I walk into the main dining room, and Dick is across on the other side of the dining room. He sees me. He stands. He goes, "Alan, Madeleine Albright." I mean, these guys, let me just tell this, I hung out at the Friars Club a lot, and I don't know where these guys came from, but they were wired differently than us, because I don't know, once they die, who replaces them. For example, remember Henny Youngman? Yeah. King of the one-liners, right? I was walking towards the Friars Club shortly after I joined. It's on 55th Street between Madison and Park. Okay, so I'm walking on Madison, I turn onto 55th Street, and I'm going to now cross the street to go to the Friars Club. Nobody was around. That's an important part of this story. No one was. It was like a Saturday or it was sometime in the afternoon. The people were in their offices. No one else was on the street. Out of a door in front of me comes Henny Youngman, who now crosses the street. He doesn't see me. He thinks he's alone. This is an important part of the story. He thinks he's alone. He crosses the street, gets to the curb right in front of the Friars Club. A pigeon comes fluttering down. He looks at it and goes, "Any mail for me?" He thought he was alone. He's speaking to a bird.
Now, Robert, speaking of the Catskills, you have your own experience of...
I have no comment. Is this on here? Well, I was a lifeguard. I saved a kid's life once. His parents tipped me $5. We're so grateful. We're so... I mean... how did they come up with the figure? I mean, I don't know. Save the kids, whatever. How about $50? What am I, Rockefeller? Let's see. How long have we had the boy? Let's see. They came up with $5. The owners, one of the band let me put on one of their tuxedos. I was a 17-year-old kid and have a tuxedo. And I actually got up on stage a little. I didn't play the Catskills until I had a reputation. I played it at the top. That is the Concord and Kutchers, who would send a limo and a nice paycheck. And the whole thing is a sham. Now, last time I was in this auditorium, they showed a film that I narrated called When Comedy Went to School. I don't know if anybody... Yeah, not according to this audience, but... And I will be here May 16th, an evening with me as a benefit for one of the organizations under this roof. I'm not sure. I think it's Catholic Charities. There are a lot of things here. I have talked about being a Jew on television since my first Tonight Show was January '68 with Johnny. Lorne Michaels was very nervous about me doing my Merchant of Venice bit on the Saturday Night Live the first year, because I went to a school with a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism. Alfred, hey, Jew boy, one of those. So I got back at them, and I played Shylock in the Merchant of Venice in front of an all anti-Semite audience. So in this wonderful Act 3 speech, I don't know if Shakespeare knew Jews, but it is the most eloquent speech about prejudice ever written, I think. And, I'll paraphrase, hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, senses, organs, dimensions, affections, passions? And the audience went, no, Jew boy, Jew boy. It was tremendous. I went to Yale Drama School, but they didn't teach stand-up comedy, although years later the dean invited me a fellowship to teach it. But I learned, Rodney Dangerfield was my mentor for stand-up. I met him at the Improv in 1966. I was at my first Broadway show, Apple Tree. I used to take a tape recorder down 44th from the Schubert Theater to the Improv. And this guy came up, I'll tell you. He wasn't famous yet. But he wrote his own jokes then, and they were worthy of an Art Buchwald, or who's that guy from New Jersey? He used to have the humor column in the Times. Russell Baker, moderately funny. I thought Buchwald was funnier. Rodney had things like, I'll tell you, our schools are unsafe, our parks are unsafe. Our schools and streets are unsafe, but under our arms we have complete protection. I mean, I'll tell you, I played some tough clubs. I'll tell you, Aldo's, formerly Vito's, formerly Nunzio's. I'll tell you, it's Nunzio's. This was a tough club. I tell you, when Nunzio's, you went down 2 steps, physically and socially. And that is way up. I mean, he got a little crazier as he got to be a star, about his grandfather sneezing on the Christmas tree. But he was brilliant.
You knew him when he was Jack Roy before he made the transition. Right?
Well, I called him Jack. I was very close with him for about 11 years. I always kept in touch, and I'm still very close with his daughter. He was a remarkable individual, a very unhappy man, even though he had success later in life. I'll tell the story later if we have time about saving his life. That's it. It's not important. I just saved Rodney Dangerfield's life, but let's go. It's a hell of a story, but I'll tell him later. I don't want to tell him. I had too much time.
I don't want to talk to you any more than I have to. Yeah.
You get the first Jewish-themed question, which is ironic because you were not practicing Jew.
Yes.
You were not bar mitzvahed.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were not bar mitzvahed.
Not bar
You're a
mitzvah.
non-practicing Jew.
Yeah.
And yet, on the podcast that we do
I
together,
don't have to practice it. I just fell into it. Really?
you're constantly obsessed when we do the show with who's Jewish and who isn't Jewish.
Yes.
How do you explain that?
I don't know. That's something like Cary Grant, I heard, is a Jew.
Right. We established that on the show.
Marilyn Monroe converted to Judaism.
Right.
And let me see. I think Lincoln liked the Jews. That was something. I once worked on one of Rodney Dangerfield's last movies. Yeah, Back by Midnight. And I remember he came up to me and he said, "Hey, thanks for being on the movie. Hey, come back to my, we're having lunch now. Come back to my dressing room. We'll sit and bullshit." And then we're eating lunch, and most of it's around his face and his shirt. And at one point, he picks up a piece of bread and wipes his face with it, and then he bites into the piece of bread. It was... It was all... I pretty much... I couldn't eat for the rest of the shoot.
We have somebody sitting over here. We have a special guest in the audience. Where is he?
You might have just.
Is he back here? Anybody see him?
Yeah.
That is Larry Storch. Larry, stand up. Wow, buddy.
Spotlight.
The great Larry Storch.
I saw him come in.
God bless you, buddy. All right.
Larry's one of the a living legend of Jewish comedy, I think.
Without question.
Yeah.
Without question.
True. He's in my second book, and Larry actually contacted me and asked to be in it, and I knew it was like one of the greatest honors of my life. He sent me a note. He said, "Could I be in one of your books?" And so I knew, I had, I just made it. To me that was like, the most important thing.
I think Larry is 94 or 93. Matt, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, hi.
Yeah. Larry is how old now?
93.
God bless him. 93. Bill and I interviewed him in his apartment last year.
Yeah, and Larry Storch refuses to talk about Forrest Tucker's penis.
But speaking of penises, you know where we're going with this.
Yeah.
But let me just say, Larry is going to be here for a little while, so if anybody wants to meet Larry or pose for a photo, he's going to be here for a bit. So, and there's going to be food afterwards, so Larry will be there as well. So.
Well, I was going to save the Burl story, but if you want to get to it.
There's one story? It's up to you, Frank, if you want to save it.
Let's get it out of the way. Alan?
Milton Berle's penis.
Is it even a penis? Is it even qualified?
Let's talk. Okay.
That's the most polite description.
Yeah. I used to write for the Friars, all these Friars roasts before I got the job on SNL. And, you've all seen those roasts. And they were disgustingly dirty. They were wonderfully disgusting. And Burl was usually the roast master, okay? And he came and he hosted an SNL when I was still a writer on the show. And because my background was joke writing and he was a jokester, Lawrence sort of assigned me to him. So I'm in his dressing room, and he's wearing one of those bathrobes that go about halfway between the thigh and the knee, like this. And I'm sitting on the couch, and here's a coffee table. He's on the other side of the coffee table. And I very innocently say, Milton, it's so weird that I'm meeting you now. I said, because for years I wrote jokes about your cock. I used to write these jokes like, after his bris, they used the foreskin to cover the infield at Yankee Stadium, all these big dick jokes. And he's standing there in this bathrobe. He said, you mean you never saw it? And I go, no. And he said, would you like to see it? I'm somewhere between the N and the O in no when he parts his bathrobe and he takes out this anaconda, okay? And now I'm looking into it, okay? He said, it's nice, huh? And I'm looking into this thing, and I go, yeah, it's really nice. And as I'm saying, yeah, it's really nice, the door to his dressing room opens, and Gilda comes looking for me. Gilda Radner sees me looking into Milton Berle's cock, going, yeah, it's really nice. And she said, Zweibel, I'll see you later. And she left. It was everything I had ever heard it was. Yeah. No. At the Friars Club, he was legendary for it. I don't remember who it was. They said they walked into the steam room, and Milton was there, and he was stark naked, and they looked at his cock, and they thought it was his son.
Didn't someone challenge him once or something, and his wife said, Milton, just show enough to win, and let's go home. Okay.
And Freddie Roman, the only joke that Freddie Roman has ever done that really made me laugh, but he said that Milton Berle's cock is more popular than the rest of him, was the line.
Well, there's a great 1976 roast of Pat Henry that Jan Murray hosted, and Sid Gould does a bit where he says, if you took Pat Henry, Guy Marks, and Milton Berle and lined up their schlongs, you could bring in a woman to braid the challah.
Can we have equal time for the vagina now, please? We don't have any women.
I interviewed Will Jordan. Do people know who Will Jordan is? Yeah, he basically invented the Ed Sullivan impression in the 1950s, and he's still alive. He's in his 90s. He's hard of hearing. But when he should do your show. But I asked him, I said, can we talk a little bit about this famous showbiz dick? I just wanted to ask you a little bit about Berle's schlong. And Will Jordan's hard of hearing, and we're talking on the phone, and he goes, oh, yes, very, very talented man, Dick Shawn. I said, no. Berle's schlong.
I was once asked to draw the schlong, but actually Howard Stern, when he wrote his book Private Parts, which I illustrated, asked me to draw it. He was doing a chapter on Milton Berle because Milton used to go on his show all the time, and Howard would only want to talk about his cock. And Milton would say, Howard, please grow up. There's other things. I was Mr. Television. I was Mr. Tuesday Night, the biggest thing in show business, and that's all you want to talk about. So Howard would be polite and start talking about the show business, and Milton would get it back to the subject of the cock somehow. But when Howard wrote Private Parts, I illustrated, so he had a chapter on Milton, and he wanted me to draw Milton with his fly open, and then the penis emerging. and then wrapping around each page of each chapter. And then the ending in the last page, but Simon & Schuster somehow had a problem with that, so it never happened. But that could have been my legacy.
Robert, did you ever work with Uncle Milty? You must have been.
No, I met him through Rodney, and I was with him at his last birthday. He died a few months later at the Beverly Hills Hotel. We have a very small ballroom, and I was in the wedding, the bride's room, the room off the ballroom, and he was with this Latino attendant. He was rather enfeebled in a wheelchair, no windows in the room, and a big cigar burning, which he never even puffed on. And I did a service by when Sid Caesar came in and other people, I directed them towards his room to wish him the happy birthday. Anyway, I'm talking to him, and that subject came up. And I made some joke about it. There's nothing short about it. He said, the word short came up. I said, there's nothing short about you. And he was so weak, he goes, ba-dum-bum. I loved him as a child, his stuff. He had a reputation, for being a kind of totalitarian leader on his show. He was, when I met him with Rodney, he was playing at the Americana, and he had an act which involved operetta. Give me some men who was stout, and he comes out with a blackened tooth and, a dress, and real Plautus, very low comedy. And anyway, I'm with Rodney, and he introduced Rodney, and then I didn't say anything or do anything. Look at the kid. He wants to get introduced. He's sort of like mean. But all in all, it was a thrill hanging around with him. Working with him, no. I never worked with him. No.
Yeah, Alan had a not so great experience working with Uncle Milty on Saturday Night.
Well, he was everything the show was not, okay? So on paper, it seemed like really poetic. The guy who started TV, Mr. TV, NBC, right? And he came to host the show. And I believe it's the only show that Lorne doesn't repeat, if I'm not mistaken.
It might be on the box set, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, now it's on DVD, but for years it was taken out of syndication.
It was taken out of syndication. Yeah. I remember he was blocking, it was camera blocking, his opening monologue, all right? So he's talking into the camera. There's obviously no one in the studio except for the crew, and he's rehearsing his monologue, and then at one point, he says to the director, at this point, when I say sneaker, okay, I want there to be a sound effect of like a crowbar falling and hitting the floor and just sort of vibrating until it comes to a stop. And they said, well, why? He said, because when that happens, I will ad lib. Oh, it looks like NBC dropped another one. I will ad lib. Okay, so think about that sentence. It was everything that the show wasn't. Anything, nothing was prepared like that. And it was around the point of his 70th birthday, and he got to another point in the monologue where he said he was going to say that I just turned 70, and he asked the director just to shoot him here, to cut off the frame here. The reason being, he said, because he will have his hands underneath the frame, so when you're watching it on TV, you won't see his hands going like this to ask the audience to give him a standing ovation. And that's what happened. And it was just everything that was antithetical to what that show is. So that was just my experience with him, that and his huge pepperoni. Yeah.
And there was an article in the New York Times the week that he hosted SNL because Robin Williams was playing the Copacabana that same week. And it was a weird kind of shift in comedy. Here's the new hot comedian playing the old nightclub and the old kind of square comedian hosting the hip new show. And there was a quote in there where Milton Berle said he was excited to do SNL because they're the stars of tomorrow. And then they interviewed Lorne Michaels, and he said what Milty doesn't realize is they're not the stars of tomorrow, they're the stars of today, and he's the star of yesterday. And it was kind of a controversy at the time.
You see, Milton is featured on the poster here for our show, and when you go up to the Museum exhibit after the panel and the food, Milton is the second most featured comedian in the exhibit. Jerry Lewis is number one. There's more Jerry Lewis ephemera up there than anybody. Milton, I think, is a close second.
And there's a story in Cliff's book that I didn't know about Uncle Milty being stabbed, being attacked by
Yeah, I think it was Albert Anastasia or one of his henchmen in the 30s at a place called the Vanity Fair, and he tells this story in his book actually. But it was difficult in the 30s when Prohibition was lifted. It was the first kind of wave of the mafia owning the nightclubs, and most of these comedians had been used to vaudeville, where they didn't really have to deal with the mob that much. So they were learning that you couldn't really insult the audience in these nightclubs because you never knew who was in the audience. So this one night, Milton did what became just a stock hack joke of his, where he said, it's novelty night, you're sitting here with your wife. And the man who he said that to was a mobster, and the woman was a mobster's mole. And so when he went backstage, the maitre d' said, table 2 wants to see you. And he goes, they probably want to buy me a drink or something. So he went and sat down. And everybody at the table was stone-faced, and he said, did you enjoy the show? And the mobster said, no. And they just stayed quiet, and Burl got very nervous. The guy grabbed him by his throat with the necktie and took a fork and jabbed it into his chin and stabbed him. But that was one of the early instances, that and Joey Lewis, where comedians were slowly starting to learn. Yeah, but I mean, guys like Jack Carter, Milton Berle, Alan King, they all seem to have a story, if not more than one, like that from the 30s or 40s of getting into to trouble by saying the wrong thing to the wrong guy in a comedy audience.
Right. Yeah. Robert, are you glad you came along at a point where the nightclubs were no longer mob run?
Well, I tell you, Rodney's wasn't, and I was. I was in the men's room next to a William R. Sage, and he said, "It's all mob," you know. Rodney borrowed money from everyone, including me, and kept them at arm's distance. I came up at the bitter end of Bleecker Street. They didn't even have a liquor license. There occasionally a chess piece would fall over, and the guys with berets, they'd get angry and said, Kierkegaard was wrong, you son of a bitch. They would be, an occasional string quartet would come in after the gig at Carnegie Hall. I don't like heckling, and Rodney would say anything. They loved him, these mobsters. He told me many stories of talking to these guys who did disastrous things, and somehow they would talk to him about it. Should I tell the story quickly about him? All right, so he had I used to follow him around all the gigs because, learning how to do it, and he was the best at it. And he had a gig in Buzzards Bay in the Seacrest Hotel. And he was starting to get well known, but he wasn't a superstar. And I just was along for the ride. Nobody knew me. And it's just 35-knot winds blowing in this sailing capital of New England. I mean, and Rodney goes, it's like a hurricane. He goes, I'll tell you, man, let's take out a sailboat. So I noticed no one else is sailing. The boats are locked up. People are in shelters wearing helmets. FEMA's giving out donuts. Nice job, Brownie. He wants to go. So he gives $20 to this little boat boy from Boston. He says, I don't know, Rodney. The boss may not like it. There's a 35-knot wind out there. It's dangerous. He says, that's all right. It's all right. I said, Rodney, what do you know about sailing? He says, what's it to know? It's a fucking wind. So the kid says, I have to give you a sailing lesson, And Rodney was like an impatient spaniel when he wanted what he wanted. And by the way, you're absolutely right. He was a sloppy eater. You're very clean of body. I mean, he showered, but his ties, his things were ripped, and he ate, shall we say, lustily at Chinatown at 2 a.m, as he said, a little new invention, napping between courses, So the kid starts going, this is the mainsail, and this is the forecastle, and this is the jib. He goes, never mind that bullshit. Just give me the keys. So the kid pushes us out. In 9 seconds, we're 1,000 yards from shore. You could have water skied behind this catamaran, like a wake, like the Queen Mary. And he's in the bow, as I learned, standing up like Washington in the painting. And he's still grabbing here. He's wearing a bathing suit. There's no collar, but I'll tell you, this is too fucking much. I'll tell you. And he's like in ecstasy, like a dog when its head out the window going on the highway. So happy. And suddenly, in his reverie, he goes, I'll tell you, man, I'm going to take a swim. I go, Randy! There's a 2 or 3 foot chop. The man was smoking 2 packs of Marlboros a day. He was in his 40s, so I don't know how to, come around closely to get him. I don't know how to change the forecastle or the mainsail. I'm from the Bronxel. We're not assailing people, yody hody shiver. The Bronx, it does yo. It stops. There's no hody ho. So I pushed the rudder all the way to one side, made a nice tight turn of 6 miles, thinking of an American tragedy, placing the one. What am I going to tell the Post? 2 of us went away. 1 came back. Were you personally jealous of Mr. Dangerfield's work? I was terrified. Finally, a white hand. I was a lifeguard, and I knew when a white person is close to drowning, I saw it at Long Beach, it's like almost green. I mean, it was this guy was close to death. His hand comes up on the thing, and he admitted to me that he was about to give up. He was exhausted and cold, and the water was 60. I mean, it was not good. But even drowning, he sounded like you would imagine Rodney Dangerfield if he would drown it. And the water is coming. That's the story.
Mr. Godfrey, that story reminds me of a joke that you like to tell about a rescue.
Oh, okay. An old Jewish woman goes to the beach with her little boy, a little grandson, 3-year-old grandson, and the old Jewish woman falls asleep on the blanket, and her 3-year-old grandson wanders off. That's how he wanders. And he walks like that. And then all of a sudden, a wave takes him and pulls him to the middle of the ocean, and the kid's screaming and crying and being pulled under, and everyone on the beach is is yelling, that kid's gonna drown. So one man leaps into the water and he starts swimming against the current, and it's knocking him against the rocks, and he's swimming harder, and then he grabs the kid and pulls him up from the water, and as he's pulling the kid up, a shark starts coming at them. So he starts beating off the shark. Well, no, that's beating off the shark. See, he starts punching the shark. You wouldn't beat off a shark because you want the shark to leave. and yeah, because if you start, they teach you in self-defense. If you're getting attacked, don't try to jerk the guy off, because he's just going to stay longer. Don't finger his ass and jerk him off, because he's not going to run away. So he starts beating the shark, not beating the shark, beating in this way. And then he finally brings the kid to the shore. He drops the kid's not breathing. He's pumping on his chest, nothing, and he's lifting his arms up and down. He's giving him mouth to mouth. And then finally the kid spits up water and is breathing. And the old Jewish grandmother goes, "He had a hat."
Alan, we were talking about the Friars Club before, and there's a great story in Cliff's book about a talent, a great comedian. I don't know how many people in the room have ever heard of Parks and Carcass.
Of course.
Albert Brooks' father. Right.
That's right, and Bob Einstein's father.
Who died during a A Friar's Roast.
That's right.
For Lucy and Desi.
Yeah. Cliff, you want to tell that story?
Sure. Well, Albert Brooks's father was a kind of a second banana on the Eddie Cantor radio program in the 1930s, and was sort of a bit of a put-on artist. He would do like local gigs in Boston, posing as like a famous dignitary, and then go up there and kind of do this double talk act, and then it revealed itself as a punchline as he spoke. And Eddie Cantor hired him to be a second banana on his show, and at one point he asked for a raise. He didn't get it. He went and worked for Al Jolson's radio program for a while. But of course, his children were Albert Brooks and Bob Einstein, who people know as Marty Funkhauser on Curb Your Enthusiasm and Super Dave Osborne. So comedy through the whole lineage of the family. But in the late 40s, he had severe back trouble and went in for a spinal operation that was botched, and was basically relegated to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. So he couldn't really do stand-up anymore, but he could still appear at roasts because he could sit on the dais and not have to stand, or he could lean on the podium when he performed. So the last 10 years of his life, he almost exclusively did Friars Club roasts and kind of owned the act and sort of really polished it up. So he was booked to do a gig at the Beverly Hilton in 1958, a roast of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. It was a fundraiser for a leper colony in Burma, which was like a big charity kind of thing at the time. It was also the 10th anniversary of the Friars Club of California. Art Linkletter hosted the show. There was 1,000 people in the audience, all Beverly Hills upper crust. George Burns went up, had a good set. Milton Berle went up, had a good set. Dean Martin, sang a song. Tony Martin was also on the show. Park Your Carcass goes up on stage, delivers this routine that he had perfected over the course of 10 years, destroys, brings down the house, the set of his life. There's a recording of it, actually. You can hear it. People are laughing, and silverware is jumping up and down as people pound their fists on the table. Park Your Carcass goes back, sits down at the dais next to Milton Berle. Art Linkletter says, "Let's hear it one more time for Park Your Carcass. How come we don't see him on TV anymore? Harry Einstein, Park Your Carcass." And just as he was about to take his second bow, he keeled over face first and dropped dead in front of 1,000 people. After he brought down the house, it was remarkable. Milton Berle, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, yelled, "Is there a doctor in the house?" And when he yelled that, Milton Berle yelling, "Is there a doctor in the house?" everybody thought it was a joke. So there was a hesitation. But then, of course, it was Beverly Hills, so there were 1,000 doctors in the house. They ran up to the stage. They tore open his shirt. They cut open his chest with a pocket knife, frayed a lamp cord to administer electroshocks directly to his heart. But it was too late. He had died. And so it was this big tragedy. And Milton Berle said to Tony Martin, "Why don't you go up and sing a song, distract the people?" And Tony Martin went up there and sang one of his hits, which was called "There's No Tomorrow." But that was Albert Brooks's father, and he says he remembers helping his father with the script the night before. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great story.
His name is Albert Einstein.
That's right.
Yeah, and he changed it.
So, Eddie and I were talking a little bit today about, and this is a hard question to ask, but we were talking about Jewish comedy specifically. And I'm going to ask everybody here, and this is a question that's been asked many times, I suppose, in many different ways, but for lack of a tidier way of asking it, what do you think makes Jews funny? Drew?
I think, with me, it's just, I love the faces. It's like, I actually, and I'm going to admit this, I like unfunny Jewish comedians more than funny Jewish comedians. To me, there's nothing I like to listen to more than Georgie Jessel. Like, going on, never funny for a second in his entire career. I just love that. And when I did my first Jewish comedian book, I put Milton Berle on the cover, and this old Milton Berle, pointing at the reader like angry, pissed off, drooling his cigar juice down his chin. It's like I remember watching him on Joe Franklin, and he was always angry and telling Joe to shut up when I'm talking, Joe. And that's what I wanted to capture. So there's nothing better. There's nothing I prefer more than unfunny Jewish comedians. So.
We should remind people, too, who your dad is, the great humorist, Bruce J. Friedman.
Thank you. Dad's health, physically he's not great these days, but his mind is still sharp. He's still writing. So thanks for mentioning him.
Georgie Jessel was one of the earliest of the phone.
Yeah, he kind of, with
Yeah,
his mother.
Hello, Mama. Yeah, how are you, darling? Yeah, what? You're seeing spots in front of your eyes? Well, why don't you put your glasses on? Are they on? Oh, now you see the spots clearer. What, did you get that parrot I sent you on your birthday? What? You cooked it and ate it? But that parrot spoke 5 different languages. Oh, he should have said something.
Our friend Tom Leopold went to see Georgie Jessel live when he was in his 90s, and he did the same "Hello, Mama," with a plastic phone. "Hello, Mama," and drooling and like.
Well, when he became old, he became like a super patriot, sort of like a Dennis Miller kind of jingoistic rah-rah Americana. And apparently he used to like close his act in the 70s with, I don't know if it was Yankee Doodle Dandy or something like that. But to make it seem more heartfelt, he would stare into the spotlight so that his eyes would tear up. And people would think that it was like this really heartfelt thing. Yeah.
The toupee falling off his head. We have some great Georgie Jessel things upstairs in the Museum, as you'll see.
And his song was one bright and shining light that taught me wrong from right. I found in my mother's eyes. Those babies tales she told of streets all paved with gold. I found in my mother's eyes. Just like a wandering sparrow, a lonely soul, I walked the straight and narrow till I found my goal. A light from up above, a bright, unselfish love, I found in my mother's eyes.
My turn, huh? I was in an elevator once with Mel Brooks, and we were going down, and then the elevator stopped, the doors opened, and an Asian woman wearing a sari and had one of those red dots in the middle of the forehead walks on, and Mel looked at the red dot and went, "Your coffee's ready." I think that pretty much says it all. Okay, yeah.
You know, there's always a question. In my whole career, I've been asked, occasionally, why are there so many Jewish comedians? I would say it's a cultural thing. All cultures laugh. Some laugh more than others. I would say the Jewish culture is absolutely saturated with humor. And Irish, too, and American slaves, and the concentration camps, they had their humor. So that it must have to do somewhat, even if obtusely, with oppression. But I'll give you an example. One of my a beloved friend, Arthur Gelb, who was well known at the New York Times. He basically ran the Times under Abe Rosenthal for years. And he and his wife are O'Neill scholars. Anyway, at his memorial last year in a Broadway theater, his widow, Barbara, asked me to do a certain routine of mine that he just loved. So at this memorial, where there was some mirth, but, he was an old fellow, but it was it was about ordering a kosher meal. And, so, will the Jew who ordered the kosher meal please ring his hostess call button? Repeat, will the Jew who ordered the kosher meal Mr. Abramach Witzenberger Hein Golden Silver. Are you the Jew, sir? We'll check your coat in a moment. Jew? You're the Jew? May I see your genitalia, sir? We have the Jew here. And this hospitality doesn't end. I mean, the pilot... Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Duncan up on the flight deck. We're about 70 nautical miles from Atlanta. The temperature's 82 degrees. Humidity is 64%. Incidentally, it sure hope the Jew enjoyed the kosher meal back there as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you in Delta Ethnic Foods Week. I had the kosher venushkis, which it says here help the Jews in their programs in Russia and Poland. The pursers having the kishki, which is, I'm told, Jewish health food. That's flour and fat stuffed into the intestinal tract of a cow. God bless you people. No wonder you lived over 3,000 years. I say you keep going. The first officer has had the cholent. You ever see cholent? It's a stew with fatty, with prunes floating in it. Think Gowanus Canal after a cruise ship leaves the harbor. So even in tough times, and I gotta say, I don't know everything about every comedian, and I love show business, but I'm not too involved. I mean, I don't know who's what and what, but I think a lot of comedians, Seinfeld may be an exception, have some depression or neuroses. The wives are laughing here of both of these guys here. That's the sand and the oyster for a lot of people. Like Tennessee Williams said in some preamble to a new edition of what's the one about glass? The Glass Menagerie. He said he's thankful for his neurosis because it was the sand in his oyster to create. It's sad to think that that's what it took. I don't think it takes him everything, but I think that there is in professional comedians a counter yin and yang of sadness. There's a Pagliacci syndrome. I just made that up.
One of the best descriptions was actually from Pat Cooper I was talking to, and he's
I can't talk about him then.
Yeah, he's Italian, and he was saying, I used to watch the Jewish comedians, and they were brilliant. They were brilliant, and it was so meaningful. And then I'd listen to the Italians, and they all sound like assholes. And then I realized what it was. The Jews have gone through pain and suffering for centuries. And what did the Italians ever do? They sit in their yard.
Sit in their yard?
Speaking of service, performing, Robert was talking about a friend passing away in a service. You recently spoke at the service, Mr. Gottfried, of our friend Abe Pagoda. Yeah. You want to share some of what you said at the service?
I said, well, when they announced that he was dead, everyone had the same reaction. How could you tell? And then I pointed to the coffin and I said, "This is the 20th time we buried Abe Vigoda."
Well, there was a false story that he had died
many times.
a few years ago for some stupid reason.
Many times. All right, so as we wind down, I got a question for everybody here. By the way, Eddie, you wanted to comment about, I told you that I was going to ask Gilbert about that joke, the saving of the boy, and you had something to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to this joke about the boy on the beach. A scholar by the name of Richard Raskin wrote an essay on this joke, and it's called The Evolution of a Jewish Joke, and he traces its history. And the joke actually comes from an anti-Semitic joke that was first published in England in 1822. And the joke then was a Jewish boy went to the theater and was so eager to get to the front row that he fell into the orchestra pit and was injured. At the theater, at their own expense, paid for his treatment at the hospital, but the boy died. His mother came to collect his things at the theater, which they gave her, and she said, "Thank you for having him treated, but I'm also going to need the ticket. He didn't get to see the show."
That sounds like the Joey Ross story, doesn't it? How Joey Ross isn't Jewish, is he? He is Jewish.
Yeah.
Totally
Let's tell
Jewish.
it. Can we tell the Joey
You
Ross?
know who
story?
he is? Ooh.
Yeah.
Bill Cohen, Car 54.
He was Tootie, right?
Joey Ross was like a strip club comedian who Nat Hiken cast in the Phil Silver Show and Car 54, made him a star, but the consensus of most comedians was that he wasn't that talented, but there was something about that character actor grizzled face that people took to. But by the late 70s, his career was over. It was just those two sitcoms, so he was booked to do a stand-up gig in 1982. Some people say it was an old folks' home. Some people said it was Bud Friedman's Improv. Everybody's got a different version of this story. But he was doing his dreadful act, and halfway through, he felt chest pain, and he sat down on the stage and dropped dead. Again, like Park Your Carcass. And so the next week, they wanted to bury him, but they didn't have any money, so some people say it was his wife, some people say it was Chuck McCann, some people say it was a hooker who came to collect his pay.
Rashomon.
Yeah, it's like a Rashomon version. And so, anyways, the woman went up to the fellow, the booker, and said, I wanted to collect his money, and he said, sure, and cut her a check for $50. And she said, it's supposed to be $100. And he said he didn't finish the show. But it kind of reminds me of that joke.
Did Joey Ross have a penchant for hookers?
Yes, he only married
He did.
hookers.
It had to be a hooker.
He married
He
9
lived
of
in
them.
common law with a hooker.
I think 9 of them he wound up. He kept divorcing them because they kept fucking all his friends, and he would marry another one.
He was what Rodney called a rounder. He like Rodney would do these theoretical things, like ask him, because he thought of him as quite prehistoric. I mean, he was.
Played a caveman.
He once asked him, let me ask you this, Rodney said, how much would you want to kill your sister? And most people would say, what, are you crazy? He goes, 10,000,
And there's a story.
And the cast hated him, by the way, on Car 54.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nat
Supposedly
Hiken,
smelled also.
Nat Hiken
He didn't
said,
want, True.
if he continues the show, it'll be without Joey Ross. They hated him. But I heard a story that the heads of Johnson & Johnson, who were like the sponsors of the show, stopped by the studio. And they were introduced to each cast member. Each one shook their hands and smiled and had their picture taken with them. And when they passed by Joey Ross's dressing room, the door was open and he was jerking off. And the heads of Johnson & Johnson just, of course, screamed and made a run for it. That's... Yeah.
It's a shame you never got a star on the Walk of Fame.
It's interesting that Robert said he looked like a caveman. He played a caveman.
Yeah.
It's about time.
Yeah, Sherwood Schwartz, creator of Gilligan's Island and Brady Bunch, created that.
This
It's
crowd.
about time. It's about space.
Wow.
About two guys in the craziest place. Yeah.
What was the question again? I think I didn't get. What was the question? We're going to wind down. Winding down is a. I'm sorry.
In Cliff's wonderful book, once again, The Comedians, you talk about a lot of people, a lot of comics that I don't think, certainly not household names, a lot of funny people like Al Mosberg, and
Right.
Parley Carcass was one, B.S. Pulley, and Jackie Miles, and Frank Fay, who you say was the first stand-up comic.
Yeah, I mean,
Not a Jew, though,
Anti-Semite,
right? Not
too.
a Jew.
yeah, he wasn't Jewish. He influenced some of the biggest Jewish comedians of the 20th century. Jack Benny was influenced by Frank Fay. Milton Berle was influenced by Frank Fay. Bob Hope was influenced by Frank Fay. And the reason he was considered influential was that for the most part, prior to him, comedians wore costumes, funny hats to get laughs, they used props, or they performed in a 2 or 3 man team. Frank Fay had done that as well, and he didn't like it. He didn't like the seltzer bottle thing, so he attempted to do stand-up dressed the same way he'd be dressed off stage, in a nice suit, just went up there alone and just talked in his normal voice. And initially, this is around 1916, 17, the reviews were very hostile. They said, Frank Fay needs a proper straight man to feed his punchlines. Clearly doesn't know anything about comedy. You can't do comedy without props, all these kind of comments. But slowly but surely, the style gave way, and people started to emulate it. There was a guy named Julius Tannen, who Jack Benny kind of ripped off early on, and they all started performing like that. Bob Hope, same thing, this kind of glib persona. But the strange thing was that Frank Fay was known as a notorious anti-Semite. Milton Berle tells a story. He was such a fan of Frank Fay, he was standing in the wings of the Palace Theater watching him perform, and Frank Fay saw him with his peripheral vision and whispered to the stagehand, get that little Jew kid out of the wings, get that little kike out of the wings. And so when Frank Fay finished, he got all this applause, he walked off the stage. Milton Berle was waiting for him with a stage brace and clubbed him in the face and tore open his nose. And Frank Fay married Barbara Stanwyck before she was famous, and some people believe the movie A Star is Born is based on their relationship, how the woman became more famous than the man. And at the time, there was a joke going around Hollywood that said, who has the biggest prick in Hollywood? Barbara Stanwyck.
You can see Frank Fay in the movie Nothing Sacred, which is an early color comedy from 1936. Still holds up, but he's the guy who hosts the nightclub scene with Carol Lombard. So.
Can I remind everyone that I am here May 16th in this very auditorium? I want a full house like today. And I also have a book that's not on sale here, but it's called The Amorous Busboy of Decatur Avenue. And it's pretty good. It ends when I'm 25, so I owe about 2 more books if I want to cover my...
It's a good read. One of the things that turns up in the book a lot is theft, is the thievery, is these people stealing each other's acts. I mean,
Yeah.
Gleason taking his catchphrase from a guy named Frankie Hires.
Frankie Hires. There was a really interesting nightclub in the 40s called the Club 18, and it was kind of an antidote to the idea that the mafia ran all these nightclubs. If you were an insult comic, you couldn't really work without fear, so 5 kind of now obscure insult comics, including this guy Frankie Hires, banded together and opened this club on 52nd Street called Club 18, and it was an insult club. That's how it was advertised. Come to this club and the audience will be insulted, and they would rove the audience with cordless mics and do insult comedy. Jackie Gleason, who was unknown at the time, got booked there as kind of a substitute comic. But this guy Frankie Hires would start every show with, away we go! And then they would start insulting people, and apparently Jackie Gleason took that later for his show.
Yeah, and Rickles is accused of stealing Jackie Leonard from
I don't agree with that. Jackie Leonard was insult, but they were totally different. He just had bitterness. And by the way, I worked with Rickles. I shot some film with him, actually, not film anymore, His mind is like right on the money, just like Jonathan Winters was at the end, one of my idols, not Jewish. Body was giving up, but the head was still there, all the wit, all the quickness. As I get older, I'm more and more interested in the acuity of old comedians. Like Henny Youngman lost it at the lunch table at the Friars, but he still could do his jokes.
Well, to a pigeon.
I know. But then
What
he
kind of
could-
acuity is that?
That's fantastic.
He's talking to a bird.
That's a beautiful story. It's just automatic. But then when he couldn't
But-
do
but
his jokes anymore. That was
Old comedians today, 4 or 5 nights a week, Mel Brooks drives over to Carl Reiner's house and they watch old movies together. And I asked Carl, what movies do you watch? And he said, any movie that's got the phrase, secure the perimeter. We watched that movie. And I asked Mel the same question, and he said, mostly the Bourne Ultimatum. mostly the boy. And he says, well, at this age, we don't know who the bad guy is. So every night we sit there, he goes, I think it's him. I think it's him. I think it's him.
So last question. We're talking about Al Wolfsberg, we're talking about B.S. Pulley, Frank Fay, Jackie Miles, a lot of these characters from the book are Park Your Carcass, who was certainly not a household name. Starting with Drew, who do you consider an underrated talent, a name that people wouldn't know necessarily, who you found especially funny?
Well, I think when you see the museum show after the panel, you'll see, Jerry Lewis is all over the place, but then there are a couple of guys who's like one little image, and one of them is Jackie Miles, who was my dad's favorite comedian growing up. He used to see him perform at the Laurel's Country Club in Loch Sheldrake every summer. He loved Jackie. That was his Joe DiMaggio of comedy, he would say. So I always heard about the legend of Jackie Miles, but then I later heard some of his recordings, and he really is funny. He did kind of like a gay Jewish shtick, and he would imitate Jewish women at the resorts, and the stuff really holds up well. And I was really happy to hear that and to realize my father was really right about the guy. So there's two samples of Jackie Miles up in the museum, which you'll see.
So Jackie Miles.
Yeah.
I think this guy is also probably upstairs in the museum. A guy named Al Kelly, who
He
was
is. Now that's a Jewish. That's a Jewish
He
name,
did
right?
this great. For people that don't know, he did this great double talk, and when you listen to it, it's just some of the best comedy. It just the way he runs is just incredibly precise, and it's just it doesn't just make you laugh; it makes you laugh. Al Kelly.
We have Al Kelly's autobiography is up in the museum in one of the cases.
So Jackie Miles and Al Kelly. And Alan, I'm curious.
Well, this isn't really a comedian, but as a writer, there was, I wonder if you guys remember him. There was a guy, and he died. He used to be at the Catch a Rising Star. His name was Ronnie Shakes.
Oh, yeah.
He did a joke, and as a writer, you listen to jokes and go, I could have written that. And one night, I sit in the back, and he said, I was at my shrink today, and this is a man that I've been telling everything to for the last 7 years. Has been spilling my guts to, telling him everything that hurts me and where I come from and what all my tortures and everything. And today he said something to me that brought tears to my eyes. No hablo inglés. And when I heard that, I went, wow, if I live to be 1,000, I don't write that joke, okay? Yeah, it's a wonderful joke.
I remember Shakes also had a line. He goes, my biggest fantasy in life is to have sex with 2 women. I don't mean at once. I mean in a lifetime.
Robert?
Well, 2, actually, I think, of Lord Buckley, who preceded Lenny Bruce. He used to do these kind of jazz takes on the Bible. The Naz was Jesus. And he was actually a guest on Groucho, You Bet Your Life. I have it on tape. But I'm thinking the way you are, but really, he was in the mountains, and his name was Bernie Burns. And I mentioned him somewhere, one of my HBO specials, and I got a letter from him. He's an old man. He had a routine, because the World Series always came at the same time as Yom Kippur. And the Brooklyn was always playing the Yankees in the 50s. So the cantor wants to know, boy chickle, and go out and tell me what the score is. The kid goes back, and the praying goes on. And the kid comes back, Rabala, Rabala. With 2 out and the bases loaded, Jackie Robinson hit a triple. And he goes, about a half hour later, boy chickle, it must be the 4th inning. Now go out and find out what they score. He says, Rabala, Rabala. With 1 out in first and second, Hank Bauer hit a home run in right field. And it goes back and forth. The Dodgers go ahead. And at the end, it comes in Rebel in the 9th inning. Yogi Berra hit a double with the bases loaded, and the Yankees win. And he goes, Yiskadavi, Yiskadavi. It was so apt, you know. Bernie Burns. Lou Menchel, Bernie Burns, Larry Deutsch. I saw them when I was a kid. First time I ever saw live comedy. And what a way to make a living, I thought. They come, they make people laugh for 45 minutes. They forget about their disappointment in their husbands or their wives or their children or their health. Their stomachs hurt from laughing. And he gets into his Cadillac and he goes to another bungalow colony or hotel and makes them laugh. Not a bad calling. High calling, in fact.
Mr. Gottfried?
Not an obscure by any stretch and not unsuccessful.
Okay.
But I always thought the most underrated comedian was Bud Abbott.
Wow. You've heard me said that on the show.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought when you listen to Who's on First, what makes it so funny is you're laughing at how stupid Lou Costello is for not knowing what is very logical because Bud Abbott explained it to you. As it's logical that it's who's on first, what's on second. And so to me, that's why he's underrated.
Most of his part was, yeah, go on, that's low, come on, yeah, don't tap, I'll smack you. He didn't ever had a full sentence. And he was Jewish, half Jewish.
Yes.
And he had epilepsy throughout a lot of his life.
Yeah. And what's your favorite Bud Abbott line from Abbott Costello v. Frank?
It's Costello is there. He's in fear, trying to explain the monsters to Bud, and he's going, you know. and Abbott just goes, okay, put your hands down.
I love their television shows. I think they were the best.
Great.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Surreal.
Yeah, they had no love interest and no stupid songs. They just old burlesque comics like Sid Fields on the show.
Joe
Old
Besser.
gags, but
Joe Besser, right? Your favorite?
Joe Besser, Possible Lou.
I'll hurt you. I'll harm you.
Joe Besser, Bobby Barber, Joe Kirk, a lot of greats. That show had it all.
You guys know Joe Besser?
Of course.
Stinky.
Yeah.
He became one of the
Yes.
Stooges.
This was Steve Cox was on the show, and he's a writer, and he was always a big fan of Joe Besser as a little kid, and so he wrote him a fan letter, and then a few weeks later the phone rings, his mother answers, and she goes, "Oh, Steve, it's for you," and he picks up the phone and it's Joe Besser. And he goes, I just want to tell you how much your letter meant to me. It was really very sweet. And the kid, he's nervous. He's a little kid, and he's going, could you say one of those things that you say on TV? And he goes, what? And he goes, those things you say on TV. Can you say? And he goes, I don't know. And he goes, you know what you say on TV? And he goes, I can't. And he goes, the things you say. And he goes, not so loud.
With that, gentlemen, thank you very much.